Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, and Janet will be here shortly. And we are streaming live from the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy podcast studio. And we are super excited to have Sean Casey back on our podcast. He's been on our podcast, I think at least 3 times. And he's a regular because he has so much information, so much wisdom. He actually is a health and fitness coach, and he just coached an Olympic athlete to a gold medal. Congratulations to that, Sean, and welcome to our show.
Hey, well, it's a pleasure to be on the show. It's always exciting talking with you, learning from you, brainstorming on things, and yeah, it's been a great day so far. One of my clients won an Olympic gold medal about 3 hours ago, so it's still basking in the excitement of that. So if I seem like I'm glowing, that's probably why at the moment.
That is just super cool. Congratulations to that. I can't imagine the feeling, and I'm sure he is super excited also.
No, it's been good. His name's Victor Axelson. He's an exceptionally hard worker, and it's fun. This kind of slides into the topic for today is, although he's an elite Olympian, he still has to go through the normal everyday things that a lot of people through, and there's a lot that we can learn from. I say himself, but anyone who's competing at a high level that the everyday person can also incorporate within their own lives.
Well, and one thing about it, and I don't think people realize this, but if we're all our bodies as humans were created to be athletes. We were created to be strong. We were created to be fast, and those are just facts. So you know, I think we should treat our bodies like an athlete because our bodies were meant for that purpose.
Absolutely. At the foundation of every great athletic performance is a baseline level of health. And you can think about, if we're going on the extreme, you think about your body. If you have a broken ankle, the likelihood of you winning a marathon probably isn't high. So, like
Right.
I said, being able to maximize that health. And same things go from a biomechanics, also go to the biochemistry of the body. Having those foundational nutrients within your body, if you don't have the basics, beyond that gets really tough. So I always tell people it's about performance health. And without that health, you're not going to have great performance, especially long, sustained performance.
No, absolutely. Janet, what do you have to say about our bodies and treating them like what we can learn from high performing athletes?
Well, I really think that we need to get back to our ancestral a little bit because I think if we use athletes as an example, we probably will overall as a population be healthier because before our modern life, we were lifting and running and doing all that. So, the basics that you are bringing forward to us, I think is a really good building block to start with. So I'm not sure what you've already asked this morning,
That's
but
pretty much it.
um, I am really encouraged to see more people doing this too and being excited about this because I think the more we can do with our nutrition, food, and rest, that we can bring a healthier population back to our country.
I agree. And I want to get on that with nutrition and athletes. And you want to get into some controversy, Sean?
Absolutely.
All right.
That was a fun
So,
place to play.
and Sierra, while we're talking about this, see if you can find an article on this or a news event. But the Kelsey brothers, you've seen that they're promoting that new. They made some kind of special Kellogg cereal. I think it's Reese's peanut butter cup or something, and some other mixture because one liked one liked the other one. So they've actually put it into a cereal. Yeah, there it is. Let's bring that up. Um, have you heard about this, Sean?
I have not heard about this.
Okay, so we're going to bring this article up, and you can just see. So NFL brothers Travis and Jason Kelsey launching new cereal Kelsey Mix. What to know? And you can see. Can you see, Sean? There's Lucky Charms. There's Reese's Puffs. There's Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Honey Nut Cheerios. And I can't tell what that other one is. But
In the middle, it's Kelsey. So
that middle one's Kelsey cereal.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. That's why I didn't recognize that one
Yeah.
because okay. And I recognize the other ones because I've eaten them all. When I was a kid, I grew up on that kind of crap. And even as an adult, when I had weight problems, I grew up on that kind of stuff. So what are your thoughts? And they're trying to defend themselves that they grew up on this stuff and they're just fine. What are your thoughts about this, Shawn?
That's disappointing. I mean, I can understand.
Right?
I think there's a very strong reason why rates of ADHD are off the charts here in the US. That if you look at the standard American diet, you're so much higher on those things. And a lot of it comes back to nutrition we're eating, as opposed to if you go with a more of a Mediterranean style, it's significantly lower risk for those, as well as a lot of other health conditions. And I think one of the things that, and this is, when I'm working with, say, high school coaches, whoever it is they put such emphasis on gaining weight, which is fine. But what happens to these kids who are, 230, 240 pounds, who have who do not have much education on, hey, these are healthy things to eat throughout the rest of your life. I feel like we're almost setting the table for our population to have diabetes after that athletic career is over.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I do think that as a kid, although I think it's caught up with us as Americans, as a kid, you can get away with some of that stuff and eating some of that stuff, but it is going to catch up with you. And why even get somebody started? So I think as parents, we need to educate our children that cereal, it's junk food. It is junk food, period. And it's so easy to overeat. It is not nutritious for your body. Sure, it will make you gain weight. If you want to gain weight and you want to, you want to have a very high body fat, and not a lot of lean mass, then sure, eat a bunch of carbohydrates and junk food. But that's not how you're going to perform the best. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And I love how you refer to it simply as junk food on things. And it is. And for me, I like the occasional piece of cake, the occasional this type of stuff, but I know it's not healthy to start with. And so that's where you almost have to look at some of these cereals is as junk food. Like, hey, on an occasional thing, whatever, have it. Like, don't lose sleep on it. But if that's your staple in the morning for breakfast every single day, that all of a sudden is going to set up the recipe for a bad long-term future on everything.
Well, and Janet, you were going to say something.
Well, I'm just doing from observation. I've seen this even within my own family, where I had a brother that was an offensive lineman in a college university setting, and it was just put on that weight, and how you did it was you just consumed calories. And I'm sure they did have them in doing exercises, but I think there's a limit as to how much weight you can put on in a healthy time span. And I suppose that everybody's different, but nutrition needs to be, the balance of that. So starting in high school and younger, having the proper nutrition is going to give those building blocks to those athletes to put on the proper muscle and put on the proper weight. Because I think, when we're talking about diabetes and heart disease, a lot of these athletes, and it's been a while since my brother played, but a lot of these athletes just ate. Like they were just told, just eat. You need to be this weight to be on the offensive line or the defensive line. And I think that really put them in a bad, down the road, whether it was injuries for knees or, the building blocks for your muscles and your tissue to be able to perform, I think that was a failure.
No, indeed. It's really interesting. So I've been working with athletes for 20 years now. And the clients that I've had who have had the longest long-term success, they always have that foundation of really healthy nutrition.
Right.
And I'll be the first one to say is if you're someone who's trying to get 5,000 calories in a day, if you're trying to get 5,000 calories a day from whole foods alone, it can be challenging. But I always want to make sure that I cover, say, the first 3,000 of really high quality food and, 4,000 there. And then if you need to add in some extra calories, like, hey, I'm going to really load up on peanut butter because I need to hit those calorie levels, fine. But if you're not hitting those, fruits, the vegetables, across the board, it's really interesting. I was working with a client, an athlete client a little while ago, and this is what he said represents a large majority of the people that I work with. He's always like, Shawn, when I first started working with you, I was looking for all these fancy bells and whistles, thinking that you were going to share some sort of novel secret thing, whatever. Right. But he's like, looking back on all the changes we made, the thing that had the most impact for me was the fact that I increased my fruit and vegetable intake up to, 6 to 8 servings a day, roughly the size of my fist. And that's a crazy thing. I hear that literally all the time is like, it goes back to those foundational basics as opposed to these big shiny objects. And that's what I get excited working with everyday people is these same things that work for these athletes can also work for us, just as people who want to be more active and more thriving in life.
Yeah. And one of the things is, back to what Janet was saying about offensive linemen in the NFL, or her brother was at the university level, but NFL linemen have the same problem once they're trying to get to be 350 pounds or whatever, and they probably don't even start anymore if they're not that weight. So they're eating tons and tons of calories. And of course, you know what the NFL stands for. The NFL stands for not for long. So, they don't play very long. But the part is that they still eat that way afterwards.
Yeah.
But they're not burning, all those calories off. So they have a huge problem later on. And that's one of the things that we have to, as we're educating people, the difference between an athlete, a high caliber athlete, and somebody that's not burning as many calories or performing all the time is a lot of times you eat the same food, but you probably need less of it. And that's one thing that I think we have to get to people. Kind of like this, let's face it, this, Shawn, your average sedentary American should not be eating 6 to 8 servings of fruit and vegetables a day. Not even maybe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So can you hit on that?
The average individual that I work with is probably at 1 to 2 servings of fruits or vegetables a day. And 2 servings might be on the high side for a lot of the groups I work with. And so it's always interesting when I go into talk with groups. I always ask, kind of a series of questions, to an audience. I'll always say, how many people here have been sick within the last year? Usually I see about 95% of the hands, raise up. And I was like, how many of you enjoyed being sick, in the past year? Of course, all the hands come back down. And then I always ask, well, how many people here have had, more than, 2 servings of fruits or vegetables a day? I'll kind of like count off, and you'll just see the hands drop once you get around like 2 or 3. And it's fascinating. I always share this with every group. When I'm working with organizations, I always find that if we get the number of servings of fruits or vegetables above 6 a day, generally speaking, the rates of sickness greatly go down, pretty significantly. We get their vitamin D levels high. My goal, when I'm working with people is like, hey, let's have 95% of people not have to worry about any sort of sickness, this upcoming year. And obviously you have people who have some sensitivities, to certain fruits or vegetables or whatever it is. But and I think another good point to touch on here, I'm thinking about fruits and vegetables is making sure you're going for the whole version of it. I find a lot of people who go for just the fruit juices end up adding on a lot of sugar in their hurry. Or I'm sure you guys have probably seen this too, is you have the people who think that they're drinking Sunny Delight. I always think the worst is you have the person who's drinking Sunny Delight thinking they're getting a real fruit, and it's just artificial crap.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and again, kind of like the cereal analogy is junk food. Sunny Delight is junk food.
Yeah.
I mean, you might as well take some water and just dump some sugar into it and just drink it. It's really, and I guess there's some flavor, and probably most of it's artificial. I'm not sure about that, but and that's another thing too, Shawn, is when you said eat the whole fruit, also not just the whole fruit, but eat the whole fruit. Don't put 7 or 8 servings of fruit into a blender and blend it up and drink it as a smoothie. I mean, because we see, you probably see this too, when you're tracking people and they're just having a struggle losing weight. Well, I eat healthy. Well, tell me what you eat. Well, for breakfast, I have a smoothie. Well, what do you put in your smoothie? Well, I put some whey protein in there because whey protein is good for me. Oh, sure. And I put some Chobani yogurt in there because Chobani is good for me. And I put a scoopful of peanut butter because, that can be good for me. Oh, no, they'll say almond butter or something like that. That's better, right? And then I put a banana in there, an apple, and some blueberries and blackberries. And they're all healthy for me. And I'm like, yeah. And then they're like, it's like 1,000 calories. I mean, seriously. Oh, and then, they throw some kind of whole milk in there so they can get their keto in there. And it's like, seriously? And you can drink it like this, but I dare anybody to eat all that stuff at once. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to eat the apple and much else.
Yeah.
So smoothies are dangerous.
They are. I always feel like smoothies are like the rug underneath your feet that gets pulled out, and you don't even realize it's getting pulled out underneath you.
Yeah, right.
Before that, because
Right.
also you're flat on your face with a 1,500 calorie breakfast, health
Yeah,
drink.
right. Well, and I will say this about smoothies. You were talking about, certain athletes that need to, eat extra calories outside of, the whole foods, the Mediterranean food diet.
Yeah.
And I know for me, when I've had a long bike race, we're talking 50 plus miles or something like that. And I'm just, it's 9 o'clock at night and I know I'm like 2,000 calories deficient and I've got another race tomorrow, the next day. That's when I'll have a smoothie because I need those calories to recover. Other than that, I stay away from them because it's just too easy to load up on the calories.
It is. And, it's always interesting. I've always thought, for lack of better words, like bananas, most people look at bananas like this great source of, potassium and different things. And I always tell people, like, when you actually look at the potassium content of a banana, it's not like, oh my
It,
gosh, this is a
No.
great.
it's not that much.
No, and like,
No.
there's a lot of sugars. And, I always jokingly tell people, I'm like, the banana for me is kind of like the armpit of the fruit family, And in terms of, I mean, there's health benefits. So I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit, but like, with there, and it's really fascinating. There was actually a study that came out with maybe like 8 to 12 months ago, and they were looking at the antioxidant levels of berries, when somebody had them as part of a meal. And they actually found that when they had a banana as part of the smoothies, the antioxidants in the berries actually reduced by half. And so I started diving deep into it. And what it came down to was bananas, everyone's seen this before. They have a banana, they leave it out, and it goes brown, right? There's a specific enzyme in it that actually speeds up how fast it burns through antioxidants. So when you start adding that to these other things, you actually burn through the antioxidants in these other foods that you're having with it. So kind of
Interesting.
a fascinating thing whenever I think of smoothies. Your strawberry banana is kind of like the go-to that most people do.
Yeah, and I will tell you about bananas in general. We just don't buy them anymore, because you're going to buy them in a whole bundle anyway.
Yeah.
They're it unless you're eating a lot of them, and the only reason you should be eating a lot of them is if you're burning it all the time. I don't because I know typically if I do have banana, I just have one of them because you just don't need usually a full banana, and banana is one of those things that doesn't have a lot of fiber, so they're easy to overeat and they're loaded with sugar. Their glycemic index is super high, and their glucose load is high. So, I just typically that's one of the fruits that we stay away from because of those reasons.
Right there with you on that one. So I love that approach.
So how do you go about, because I think this is something that's misunderstood a lot too, is a serving size. Because even when you're looking at packages, which we try to tell people to avoid, as fresh as whole, if it doesn't rot, don't eat it. But serving sizes, I think, are really misunderstood.
No, I agree with you. I always tell people, and this is something that I like using, is kind of like your hand as reference points. And I always tell people, if it's a whole fruit, so when I say whole fruit, I say whole fruit or whole vegetable, I don't mean like a dehydrated one, because sometimes you can get in trouble with, oh, I had, a handful of raisins, not realizing that was just 600 calories. And so
Right.
when I'm working with people, I always use a fist as a reference point for serving a whole vegetables or whole fruits. And the reason why I like using a fist as a reference point is if I'm talking with, say, fourth graders, they have smaller hands, therefore they need to eat smaller portion sizes. And so I always tell people, think about your fist as serving fruits or vegetables, aim for 6 of those a day and make at least 4 of those servings as non-starchy vegetables. And so that's where I usually start with people from a serving size standpoint, because I know if they're going with the non-starchy vegetable, they're going to be getting a lot of fiber with very little actual, calories more often than not. If they're having 2 or 3 servings of fruits or vegetables, again, assuming if they're physically active, they're not, uncontrolled diabetes or anything
Right.
of that nature. That is usually my starting point, and then adjusting relative from there. And I always try to get people switching. So now how we usually say fruits and vegetables, I kind of want people to think about vegetables and fruits. So kind of reversing that.
Right.
That way the
Mhm.
vegetables is the key thing that we're focusing on. Because for most people, that's what they need more of to lower their, the blood sugar, support health, wellness, etc.
I like that. Vegetables and fruits. I'm going to tell you, it's going to be really hard for me to overcome fruits and vegetables.
This is what we've learned. Yes.
But one thing I like about what you said too is the dried fruits, or they are so easy to overeat because there's not water in them for one, and they're more concentrated in sugar because they take the water out of them. So they're a lot sweeter, and some of them have added sugar in them. So you have to be very careful. And although in a pinch they might, it'd be better than probably a Snickers bar. You just got to be very careful, and just remember that the more whole you can eat of food, the better. So the more raw, right off the vine, or right out of the garden, or right out of the dirt, is the better. So, corn on the cob is going to be better than canned corn because you're not going to eat as much of it for multitude of reasons. Correct?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing too, and this is the harder you have to work for the food, I think the harder it is to overeat for it, because it's like your
Right.
brain, your stomach, and your gut finally have time to, coalesce. Like if you're having, I'll use fruit cocktail, for instance. When I was a kid, I ate a pile of fruit cocktail, probably in heavy sugar syrup. I'll be,
Yeah, right. I'm, it sounds good to me when you say that. I'm like, hey, that triggers something when I was a kid,
That's
right?
the same. So when you were talking about like the breakfast heroes growing up, like guilty as charged, I was the same way. But as we're going to make changes on things, it's like, okay, I can eat a lot of fruit cocktail and heavy syrup without even realizing it. But if I was in it, because it doesn't take much work, right? Like
No.
usually the fruit's already soft to start with. I can just mow right through it. But if I'm actually biting into an apple, or I'm peeling something, or if it's corn on the cob, like, it takes a
Yeah.
lot of time, relatively speaking, to go across the teeth there.
Well, and then corn on the cob, you got to shuck it too. So
Yeah.
preparing the food is what's very important. And
Yeah.
I think that's, Sean, I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have in society now, is that you can just take box after box out of the store, put it in your freezer, put it wherever to store it, your fridge, and you can just put it in the microwave. Oh, I'm still kind of hungry. I'll put another one in there.
Yeah.
Been there, done that, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's why we don't buy those things. But let's just say this: if you've got to, you know, cook the meat, cut the meat up. Let's say you're making a black and blue salad, so you got to cook the steak, you got to cut the vegetables up. Um, After you eat that salad, you're like, yeah, I'm still kind of hungry, but I really don't want to make another one. I'm too lazy.
Yeah.
Serious. Been there, done that. And that's probably good. Whereas if it was all you had to do was pull it out of the fridge and then throw a bunch of dressing on it, there you go. I mean, that's, I think preparing our food is one of the problems that we have, is that we just have so much prepared food. That's why we should stick to whole foods and try not to eat out of a box.
No, it's cool. And, it actually kind of sparked an idea when you were talking there. One of the things I always tell clients to do is, I'm like, I need you to add more friction in your life. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, when everything is smooth, you can go through really, really quick. I'm like, hey, you're not burning the calories of, walking outside, picking out, those
Right.
little things that kind of build up. But I'm like, too, when there's no friction, there's no point for you to pause and think like, oh man, I really don't want to, going back to what you were saying, that extra work involved, and like, oh, actually, I'm pretty good for right now. Like, so adding in those frictions in a healthy way, I think is beneficial for most individuals.
So I'm thinking about, since we're talking about athletes, there's a controversy that gets thrown out at many levels, that first we have to preload and load after, and after workout, and we have to eat a certain type of diet. Like, it's like there's almost a religion out there, like you should only do this and you should only do that, because from my perspective, I think we're all dynamic. So you know where I'm going. Like, there's people that think you should be totally keto if you're this, or I mean, and we're all different, right?
Yeah.
So with your athletes, how do you approach, like, because we all have different body types too. How do you approach that with them, and what their needs should be or need to be?
I think there's a lot of individualization that goes into it, and being cognizant of the sport that they're playing and what their training sessions are looking like. And here'd be a good example. If I'm working with a baseball athlete, that baseball athlete probably doesn't need a whole lot of carbohydrates and a whole lot of, pre-workout energy, for lack of better words, because in a given baseball game, they might be moving a total of 20 seconds. It's
Right.
not there.
And that's long. 20 seconds is long. I mean, seriously.
That's like 3 inside the park home runs by
I
the
was
same
gonna say,
athlete.
'cause- right.
But I think about, you guys are, as you guys know, as with all the biking that you guys do, if you don't have enough food in your tank, you're going to start to, fall off the cliff really quickly. And I think it also comes back to is what, the type of energy that you're burning. I've seen some people who have really pushed a ketogenic diet really hard for athletes who are doing a pile of fast running or endurance. And just going back to, kind of baseline biochemistry, if you're going above a certain rate, you're burning through a decent amount of carbohydrates for energy. And so that's one of the things that I've seen take over in the sporting world was, doing a ketogenic diet just because you happen to be more of an endurance athlete. And often I find when I get carbohydrates back into an athlete's body, their performance increases.
I'm with you 100%. And I will tell you, I've gotten to so many debates with people about keto and, and I have a coach and he was on the world championship level and he coaches Olympic type athletes now. And so he knows what he's doing and I trust him. And, but you'll get these people out there that say, "Oh no, endurance athletes, that you don't need carbs at all. You don't need carbs at all." Right. And here's what's funny about that, Shawn. I've never met one of those guys. This is what I ask them. All those guys are usually, I'm just going to say this. This isn't maybe very nice, but it's true. Most of those guys that say that, they're gym rats.
Yeah.
And they work out in the gym and they've got nice bodies and their workouts are 45 minutes long. Their heart rate never gets up above 110.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, for 2 hours at zone 3, zone 4, zone 5 heart rate. They've never even been there in their life. And they say to eat keto. This is what I'll ask them. Have you ever tried to eat steak and drink oil when your heart rate's 170? Their answer is no, because they've never done it.
Uh-huh.
So, my whole point is that, every athlete is different and you need to trust what the top caliber athletes are doing. And this is what I'll tell them. If the top Tour de France guys are keto, then I would go that way. But if they're eating carbs, I'm going to follow them. And I'm never going to be a top Tour de France rider, not even close. But I'm going to try to do what the top athletes are doing because that's kind of what we're talking about here is follow their protocols because it's probably working.
Yeah. There's, it's interesting. There's a high level ultra endurance athlete that was known for a little bit of, the ketogenic thing. And I was actually talking with him about like going more in depth and like physiology wise, like, in my opinion, I think there's other things that would be more appropriate. And so then we started, kind of bantering back and forth. And I'm like, well, how many carbohydrates are you eating when you're at your high level? And he's like, oh, when I'm actually training hard, I'm close to 500 grams of carbs a day.
There you go.
See, we don't get the whole story, right?
Yeah, I was like, yeah. There's a story behind the agenda.
Exactly.
Push.
Right.
Well, I do think, if we're going to apply this to the general population, I guess where I'm going with this is that, there's a time and place for these things. And obviously, I think what we've done is we've kind of set people up for, you have to do it XYZ, but really it should be, what are you doing when it's appropriate or not appropriate? Because I feel that people fall into this trap. Well, these athletes, they're preloading, they're loading after, or these people are doing, this. And so that it applies to me. But, I kind of look at our two kids, like one kid, my gosh, he can hardly eat enough and the other has to be super careful. So your body type plays a big role, and also your activity, like one's got a desk job and the other's working, like physical working. So there's different things that are playing into this, and that would be true probably in an off season with an athlete too. Like your off season athlete is not going to be taking in as many calories until he starts his training again, right? There's going to be different levels.
Absolutely. And this is a great point. And, You know how from an athlete standpoint, they always talk about training periodization. So the
Hmm.
idea at certain times of the year, you're training harder. Other times you're actually going lower training because you're trying to get your body to peak and that type of a process. What often doesn't get talked about, and you bring up an awesome point here, is that idea of nutrient periodization. At certain times of the year, you want to have those high levels so you can feel your training. Other times you want to be able to pull back on that. And that's on an individual level, much less when you start comparing individual to individual to individual relative to the sport they're playing. I mean, it would be you guys are more experts than I am, obviously, on the medication side of things, but it'd be like if you had somebody who came in because they had um, I don't know, they had recurring diarrhea or something. So you have that patient, and then you had another patient that came in with, some sort of neurological specific thing or some other like totally separate thing. Like how you treat those patients are going to be
Totally.
different because
Right.
they're on much different conditions that they're coming into the
Yeah.
pharmacy with.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think one thing a good point that Janet brings up is just that, we should all, whether we're high caliber athletes or just day to day people living our lives, we should eat around our workouts,
Yeah.
or our activity. Let's call it activity because not everybody works out. So we should eat around our activity level. And I know I do that religiously. Mondays are typically our days off from training. So we don't usually do any kind of strenuous exercise on Monday. And those are days that we largely fast and eat very few carbohydrates because we just don't need them you know and the only time I really eat a lot of carbohydrates anymore is most of my rides, not even them. It's my races. I will preload and I'll eat, basically, pure sugar packets during the gels during the race, and sugar water during the race. But other than that, I just, I don't have to because my body has been, we still get fuel and energy from other places in our body,
Mhm.
whether it be our fat reserves or glycogen reserves first. So,
No, and that is a great thing to do is planning your nutrition relative to the energy demands of what you're doing. Most athletes I work with, I'll always have a day where they're doing like a 12 to 16-hour fast, just because I do think it's,
mhm,
nice to kind of, for lack of better words, clean off the metabolic machinery for a period of time, be it on an off day or a really low day. And the other thing too, I always think about is when are they going to be training the day that follows? If they have and this is something I'll do with a lot of people. If let's say if they have a really early morning session, so I've worked with a lot of swimmers over the years, and a lot of these swimmers, they might have a practice, especially if they're a youth swimmer at say 6 a.m. in the morning. And often the idea is like, okay, your last solid meal is 2 hours before your swim practice. Realistically,
that's
and
pretty
just
difficult.
yeah,
Yeah.
like
I mean, right.
as much as
I
your
wouldn't do
average
it.
yeah. As much as your average 14-year-old likes to wake up at 3:30 in the morning to cook a meal,
Right,
like
right,
I'm realistic. So in
right.
those situations, I might have a bigger meal in the evening, knowing that hey, I want to make sure they start the day off, with relatively filled, glycogen stores and that type of stuff. Have maybe a little snack beforehand. But on the flip side, and going back to what Jan said, you have to make sure you're individualizing things relative to the client of the sport. Your average person, who's maybe they just enjoy lifting weights or whatever it is, I'm probably not going to be like, hey, take a much higher carb meal,
Yeah,
in the evening hours.
right.
So it's all that kind of balance and finding what works best for the individual to maximize their performance, their health, their career. And when I say career, I mean like thriving health longevity for the
Yeah.
long haul.
Well, and that brings up a good point too. So, Jan and I typically skip breakfast. We haven't eaten breakfast in routinely for many years. Um, Here's where we do make exceptions. So, we're going to be flying, and it is just so difficult to get good food at the airport. And I get it. You can pack it sometimes, which we do, but coming back, you don't always have good food to pack. Either way, so what we'll do is, we'll eat, you know, f- before our flight, we'll eat a good breakfast, high protein, and then that can take us through. So we're not eating junk all day long in the airport because we're so hungry. So then that can take us through to dinner, when we're at a place that we can eat some decent food. So it's kind of like the athlete. You're still eating around your activities, you're eating around, your travels. If you prepare for those things, then you don't get stuck and start eating more junk.
That is absolutely. You actually struck another light bulb in my mind when you were
I
sharing
know
about
I've
travel.
got so many questions going on, so keep going.
You know, it is when you're in a really good conversation and you're like, okay, I need to pin that thought to come back to you. Right now, if you saw like thought bubbles amongst my head, I have about 30 thought bubbles. Every time you and Janet speak, I'm like, ooh, thought bubble, thought bubble, thought bubble. But going back to what you were talking about with the travel side of things, this is something I do with all the athletes I work with. A lot of them are flying different time zones on a halfway frequent basis. And or even to think about going back to say that high school athlete or whatever it is, I always tell people within reason, pack food that you know that you're comfortable with and that you're going to like. I mean, I realize you can't always have a whole suitcase realistically of food, but anything that you're able to take with you, I always find it to be really beneficial. One is it can kind of avoid eating the more of those junk food snacks along the way that just because you're hungry, you're there. But the other thing where it ties into is often I work with athletes and maybe they are at an all-day swim meet and they're like, okay, well, usually at these meets they have, ABC, X, apples, whatever it is what they like eating. Well, then they go to that swim meet, they're there all day and they don't have any of that food. So now they're taking Twizzlers and, Starburst or, whatever it is. And similarly, I've had athletes who they've like flown across the country for a marathon or whatever it is. And they're checking out the hotel in front and they're like, oh, they have, they're supposed to have a good breakfast and that type of stuff. Then they get there and they realize the breakfast is not anything close to what they wanted and eat. So, and also like, oh man, I wish I had whatever from back home. So within reason, I always encourage athletes to take food with them.
Yeah.
That's easy to travel with.
Yeah, I agree. Jen and I, most of the time when we fly, it's difficult to pack for your whole 3-day vacation or whatever. But if we're driving somewhere for 3 or 4 days, we just pack our own food. Cooking, we get a kitchenette. We even bring our grill. We'll cook steaks. It's just so much better. And not only is it cheaper, but it's better for you, and it just makes it so you don't overeat. Because let's face it. I mean, how many times do you go out to a restaurant and you tell yourself, well, you know what, today I'm gonna order the 8-ounce filet, and I'm gonna, blah 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 blah. Next thing you see a double bacon cheeseburger on the menu. You're like, well, I'm gonna have that with okay, but I'm feeling guilty about the bacon double cheeseburger, so I'm gonna have salad with it instead of fries. But then you're like, last minute, no, give me the fries, right? I mean, it happens to me regularly.
Yeah.
But if you pack your food and you eat the food that you pack, then you don't do those kind of things. So, and by the way, I mean, I know people say that eating out is more convenient. I don't think it is, honestly. If you've already packed your food, I was thinking about what we did over the weekend. If you've already packed your food, to eat out, you've got to prepare to go eat out. You got to go somewhere. So you got to get dressed differently than you might be around your house or your hotel. You got to go somewhere. That's a drive, and then you got to sit down and wait for your food. And I mean, you can probably make it faster at home. And again, it's a preparation thing.
Yeah.
Once the food's gone, you're like, well, I guess we're done. Whereas, you can order a second helping of fries. Well, let's have us done it, right?
Yeah. It's easy to do there too. And it's always kind of interesting too, especially when I'm working with people that are used to eating more that whole food type thing that fills them up quicker, and then they go out and it's obviously not always at that same level. The number of clients I've had over the years, they're like, yeah, well, I end up eating a pile. I spent a lot of money on a meal. I got the meal and realized I was still like 75% of my hunger tank was still like waiting to be filled.
Now let's talk about that. We've talked about vegetables and fruits. Look I did it right. Vegetables and fruits, not fruits and
well
vegetables.
done.
Let's talk about protein and maximizing protein. And we haven't talked about protein sources really yet. So what are your thoughts there? We talked about whole foods, but talk about proteins and whole foods.
I love proteins from Whole Foods. I think my favorites are, I'll be honest with you, I love eggs. The thing that I love about eggs is, one, they're filled with antioxidants within the yolk. There was actually a study that came out, if you had like eggs sunny side up, one egg has the antioxidant levels of 2 apples,
Wow.
which is kind of crazy. But again, with protein, you get filled up a lot quicker.
Yeah.
We know for athletes, in terms of repairing muscle, protein is absolutely key. My favorite sources are usually meat, just because it's really dense. I always encourage people to go with the lean cuts of meat. If they like, eggs, I'll go that route. If they're going for vegetarian sources, I'm a fan of lentils, just because it's pretty high density of protein within there. And then you can also have things like quinoa and those sources as well. But generally, unless there's some sort of, be it an ethical concern on the individual or that, I'm usually trying to push towards animal sources of protein.
Yeah, they're just animal sources of protein are just so much more concentrated in protein
Yeah.
compared to plant sources for sure, and I think they're more satiating also, in my
Absolutely.
opinion. One thing that I've talked about before, and we've already kind of mentioned this about Sunny Delight and the cereals, is it kind of like Janet was talking about it, and we kind of got off on a tangent on keto, which was perfect. But we get in these fad diets. I like to call them, when in reality, if we just follow what our ancestors have done for thousands of years, go back 2 or 3, 4 generations and what they thrived, that's really all we need to do. Nothing fancy.
Yeah.
But one thing about the whole maximize your protein thing that just infuriates me, and I've done quite a few videos on this, is people that buy these protein drinks and these protein bars and all this stuff so they can get in their protein quota for the day. People, that is junk food. It is pure junk food. And I get it. There are some times we talked about it where you might need to sneak some of those things in, but regularly drinking those things or eating those bars, I've compared a Quest bar to a Snickers bar. There's really not that much difference, seriously. So what are your thoughts about that?
The food sources are almost always better from a quality standpoint. Usually a lot less preservatives. It's a lot harder to eat a lot of it.
Exactly.
On there, like a steak fills you up much better than a protein bar, which is probably also going to be filled with sugar as well.
Yep.
On there. And I think that goes back to there's so many other calories that come in when you start getting those packaged foods on there. I find a lot of people too, in terms of, going back to the protein powders, and again, in a pinch, they work. But I also find too, when you're having a lot of those, protein powders in more of the drinks or the pre-made drinks, they don't have any satiation to them.
Yep.
And so when you're getting your liquid nutrition, it goes kind of back to your smoothie, is when you're having those liquids from a satiation standpoint, it's not the same as if you had, a 16-ounce steak or whatever it can be too. And the other thing is, I'm thinking about extra calories. I always tell people too, is if you're getting it from a plant source, again, I'm fine with, there's some sources a little bit higher, but usually those are also going to be a lot higher in carbohydrates. And so for someone who either A, is trying to work on stabilized blood sugar levels, or B, they're having, looking to lose weight from a calorie standpoint, those cannot always be the best source. And one of the ones I always tell is like the Achilles when I hear that, I just want to cringe, is say peanut butter. I'm a huge fan of peanut butter. I like peanut butter because it tastes good. But the number of times I've been working with clients, be it athletes, non-athletes, wherever they're coming from, and they're like, "Oh, I get a lot of protein from peanut butter,"
and you get a lot of sugar. You get a lot of sugar from it too.
Yeah, I know, right? And I'm like, "Do you realize that, because it's kind of, protein in nuts. You hear that all the time."
Right.
And I'm like, "Do you realize how inefficient, for lack of better words, it is to get your protein from peanut butter? I mean, you're looking at 200 calories for roughly about 6 grams of peanut butter, or 6 grams of protein in that peanut butter."
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I'm a fan of peanut butter too, and that's one of the things I use as my snack at home, is a spoonful of peanut butter. When I'm craving something sweet, but you got to be careful, because, like you say, it's 200 calories per tablespoonful, and of course, if you actually weigh it out, I'm sure we're using big tablespoons. I'm sure, So yeah, you got to be really careful with that. I want to back on the keto thing, because you're talking about the ultra marathoner that ate 500 grams of carbs a day when he was racing. I want to back up. There was this goes back to intermittent fasting and, kind of keto and, we don't need carbs and all that kind of stuff. There was this, you may have heard of this marathoner that ran, it was either 5 or 6 marathons back to back, fasted. He did nothing but water for those entire 5 or 6 days, or five. Yeah. So you start doing some more research on it.
Mhm.
And guess what his times were in each marathon, Shawn?
Oh, wow. If he's doing that fast and going into it, I would guess over 4 hours, 5.
6 hours.
Yeah.
Right. So he's a fast walk, right?
Yeah.
And of course, I'm doing this because anybody that's watching that talks about keto and athletes don't need carbs and stuff, they need to understand it depends on intensity. And a lot of the ultramarathoners, I could see the ultramarathoners that are in zone 1 almost all the time. Even the age group triathletes, I don't think the age group triathletes need a lot of carbohydrates. Not like the top triathlete guys. Because first of all, we realize this after, you can only eat 200 to 300 calories an hour while you're exercising. So the fact is that you're burning 1,000 calories an hour. You're always gonna be in a deficit. So you're always gonna be burning fat anyway. But ultimately, you'll probably, depending on intensity, probably perform better with carbohydrates. But the point is that, you need to know the whole picture when these people talk about, well, so-and-so did an ultra marathon keto and this guy ran 5 marathons, fasted. So why do these marathoners have to eat all these carbs? They don't need to. Well, it's because they run 26 miles in 2 hours. That's
Yeah.
why they need carbs, right?
It's in the battle of the I was going to make a tortoise and a hare analogy, but if the hare actually won in that fairy tale, I guarantee that hare was not taking on a ketogenic diet when they were plowing through that, right? Like you need
Exactly.
to have that rocking on in your wheels if you're going to be shooting flames off the heels. And so and what I'd also be interested in too is when you're talking about the 5 days of fast and then going into the marathon, like in my head, I'm thinking like, I bet you, without knowing more of the story, I'm like, I bet you there's a high likelihood that person got pretty sick afterwards. Like my guess, if you looked at their blood chemistry, it would have been a complete smash.
Yeah.
Smash. I'm thinking about the athletes I'm working with where we do a hard competition. If their carbs aren't enough to support them, like they feel totally smashed for a lot of days after that competition,
Exactly.
as opposed to if we're getting all the nutrients and tailoring them along.
Well, I think that's what we have to remember too. And we already talked about this a little bit, but you have to realize what you're doing, the next day also. So, the guy that fasted for 5 days. Well, if he fasted for 1 day, it might not be that big a deal, but he kept doing it for 5 days. That can't be good. I know he's doing it to prove a point, but one of the things is that food does help us recover. Good food helps us recover. So, we can't recover with as well and go as hard if we don't recover with good food.
No. And the other thing that's interesting too, and I always talk about this with people, especially if they're getting really nervous about having carbohydrates around the time of the workout, is we know when you're working out, you're raising your cortisol levels. Like again, you're trying to get food out in the system for, kind of for energy purposes, and that's stressful on the body. We also know if your cortisol levels are continuously high, it drives your immune system down. And so one of the things with carbohydrates is that does obviously increase insulin levels. Well, we know that insulin can help push cortisol levels back down. They kind of antagonize each other a little bit. And so again, I don't have data to support this in terms of referencing a study X, Y, or Z, but I think that's one thing just from a physiology standpoint you got to be aware of is not that carbs are evil. In fact, by raising that insulin from time to time, A, that's going to help with muscle recovery, and B, that's going to help drive cortisol levels down, which do have, if you're able to systematically, have cortisol imbalance and fluctuations, having those low periods does give your immune system a bit of a boost.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just another reminder that, food just helps us recover. That's, there's 3 things that we can do in large to be healthy as athletes or anybody in general. As athletes, recovery is, recovery is more important than than the actual workout, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
That's going to do way more for you.
It is, right, because you don't get stronger during the workout. You get stronger during recovery. So I say it, sleep, diet, and exercise in that order. And that's true whether you're a high caliber athlete or you're a day-to-day person in the office. You have to maximize those things to have a good, healthy body. And that's what we can learn from athletes, because athletes know how important recovery is. So if you're sleeping bad, you're not going to be recovering or ever healthy, right?
No, sleep is such a hammer. I feel like we could have a whole podcast on sleep alone
Yeah.
in terms of how that benefits so many aspects of health. So no, I love that triangle of movement, sleep,
Diet.
diet.
Yeah.
I'm the dietitian. I forget about diet. What's wrong with me here today? It's clearly a Monday.
Yeah.
But no,
So, Shawn,
having those things together with some stress management. Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely. So, Shawn, as we wrap this podcast up, tell us what you have a passion for.
I have a passion for helping people reach their success with that, whatever it is. If that is going after an Olympic gold medal, I love working with you. I also enjoy the people who are like, you know what? I just want to change my life around so I can have the energy and the health to enjoy my kids and grandkids. So I love helping people maximize their performance health journey wherever they're at on that spectrum.
And if anybody has any questions, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way to get a hold of me is through a few different ways. Facebook always works. Shawn Casey. I respond to almost every message that comes through on there. They can also find me on Instagram. My handle is ST, my last name CASEY 34. So STCASEY 34 but that's my handle there. My website is just caseperformance.com. People can reach out to me there also.
CaseyPerformance.com?
Caseperformance.com. CASEY.
CASEY.
Or my bad, CASEperformance.com.
That's right. That's right. Well, we'll go ahead and stream that. And if you had in a paragraph, in two sentences, how would you tell people to maximize their health like an athlete?
Stop waiting for the perfect moment.
That's wow. I wasn't expecting that.
Everyone waits for everything to be perfect before they make a change. There's never going to be a perfect day, so starting things right now will get you far further than waiting for that perfect moment to start.
There's a lot to be said with that, and a lot you can gain from that, and not just for athletes or general people, but I tell a story quite often how some of the most talented people in the world, usually they're artists when I think of them. They always, whether it's a painting or whether they're a musician, some of them, they wait for everything to be perfect before they release it, and then they never release it.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, how much
Absolutely.
wasted talent how much of wasted talent is that? We don't get to see it. So, don't wait for perfection. Start now. You're exactly right. That's awesome, Shawn. Well, thank you as always. It's a privilege and an honor to have you on our podcast. We'll definitely have you back on again.
Hey, well, thanks so much for both of you, as well as Janet. You guys do wonderful stuff and getting people healthy. So I appreciate everything that you guys do as well.
Thank you so much for the kind words.
All right.
And listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Thursday to our midweek podcast, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Thank you.